In the quiet, manicured suburb of Willow Creek, where every house mirrored its neighbor in pristine uniformity, the seeds of chaos were sown over something as mundane as grass. Willow Creek was the kind of neighborhood where the Homeowners Association, HOA, ruled with an iron fist, their rulebook thicker than a dictionary and their meetings more dramatic than a reality TV show. Every lawn was expected to be a perfect shade of green, every mailbox aligned with surgical precision, and every deviation from the norm met with swift, bureaucratic wrath. It was here, in this suffocatingly perfect enclave, that Karen Whitaker, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, found her latest target, the lawn of her new neighbor, Ethan Caldwell. Ethan had moved into Willow Creek just 3 months prior, drawn by the promise of a peaceful life after years in the bustling city. A single father in his late 30s, he worked long hours as a freelance graphic designer, balancing his career with raising his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Their modest 2-story home at 17, Maple Drive, was a fresh start, a place to build memories. But Ethan's lawn, a patchy expanse of grass that he mowed sporadically due to his demanding schedule, became an immediate point of contention. To most neighbors, it was a minor eyesore, barely noticeable in the grand scheme of suburban perfection. To Karen, it was an affront to everything Willow Creek stood for. Karen Whitaker, a woman in her early 50s with a penchant for floral blouses and an encyclopedic knowledge of the HOA bylaws, lived directly across the street at 18 Maple Drive. Her own lawn was a masterpiece of landscaping, with edges so sharp they could cut glass and grass, so uniform it looked like a putting green. Karen's days were spent patrolling the neighborhood, her sharp eyes scanning for infractions, unapproved garden gnomes, slightly faded house paint, or, in Ethan's case, a lawn that dared to grow a quarter-inch too long. She had a reputation for filing complaints with the HOA at the slightest provocation, her emails to the board legendary for their length and vitriol. To Karen, Ethan's unkempt lawn wasn't just a personal slight. It was a threat to the neighborhood's property values, a blight that needed to be eradicated. The trouble began on a sweltering July morning when Karen, armed with a tape measure and a notebook, stood on the sidewalk in front of Ethan's house, meticulously documenting the height of his grass. To her horror, she found several blades exceeding the HOA's maximum allowable length of 2 inches. Her lips pursed into a thin line as she scribbled furiously, her pen moving with the precision of a surgeon. This wasn't the first time she'd noticed Ethan's lawn, but it was the first time she decided to act. She'd given him the benefit of the doubt for weeks, hoping he'd conform to Willow Creek standards. But enough was enough. Karen marched back to her house, her heels clicking against the pavement, and drafted a scathing complaint to the HOA board, demanding immediate action. By the next day, Ethan found a crisp, official-looking letter in his mailbox, stamped with the HOA's embossed logo. The letter cited Section 4, Subsection B of the Willow Creek HOA bylaws, which mandated that all lawns be maintained at a height of no more than 2 inches and mowed at least once every 7 days. Failure to comply within 48 hours would result in a $100 fine, with additional penalties for each subsequent violation. Ethan, bleary-eyed from a late-night project deadline, read the letter with a mix of confusion and irritation. He hadn't realized his lawn was such a scandal. He mowed it when he could, but between work and Lily's soccer practices, it often slipped down his priority list. He figured he'd get to it that weekend and tossed the letter aside, unaware of the storm brewing across the street. Karen, however, was not one to let things slide. She watched Ethan's house like a hawk, her binoculars perched on her living room windowsill. When 48 hours passed and Ethan's lawn remained untouched, she fired off another email to the HOA, this time with photographs attached, close-ups of rogue clover and dandelions, each captioned with a timestamp. The HOA board, accustomed to Karen's relentless crusades, convened an emergency meeting. The board, a group of 5 self-important residents led by President Marjorie Hensley, was divided. Some saw Karen's complaint as petty, but others, swayed by her argument about property values, agreed to enforce the rule. Another letter was sent to Ethan, this time with a fine and a warning of further action if he didn't comply by the following week. Ethan, now juggling a client presentation and a school bake sale, was blindsided by the fine. He didn't have $100 to spare, not with Lily's new school supplies eating into his budget. Frustrated, he took to the neighborhood's online forum, a digital battleground where residents aired their grievances. He posted a polite but pointed message, explaining his situation and asking for leniency. The response was mixed. Some neighbors sympathized, sharing their own HOA horror stories, while others, led by Karen's anonymous account Willow Creek Pride, accused him of neglecting his civic duty. The online spat only fueled Karen's determination. She began knocking on doors, rallying neighbors to her cause, painting Ethan as a slacker who was dragging down the neighborhood. As the week wore on, Ethan's lawn became the talk of Willow Creek. Neighbors whispered about it at mailboxes, debated it over coffee, and speculated about what Ethan would do next. Karen, emboldened by her growing support, escalated her campaign. She printed flyers with before and after photos of ideal lawns, slipping them into mailboxes with a handwritten note. "Let's keep Willow Creek beautiful." She even stationed herself outside Ethan's house one evening, loudly discussing his lawn negligence with a neighbor while casting pointed glances at his property. Ethan, catching wind of her antics, felt his frustration boil into something sharper, defiance. By the end of the week, Ethan had mowed his lawn, but the act felt like surrender. He wasn't just fighting grass. He was fighting a system that seemed designed to suffocate him. As he pushed the mower under the scorching sun, he noticed Karen watching from her porch, her arms crossed and a smug smile on her face. Something in Ethan snapped. He wasn't going to let Karen or the HOA dictate his life. He began researching the HOA bylaws, poring over the dense document late into the night. That's when he found it. A loophole buried in the fine print. A clause so obscure it had likely never been used. It was a spark, a tiny flicker of an idea that could turn the tables. As he closed the rulebook and looked out at his freshly mowed lawn, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. Karen's victory lap wouldn't last long. Ethan Caldwell's discovery of the HOA loophole was like finding a hidden key in a locked room. Buried in the dense, jargon-filled pages of the Willow Creek HOA bylaws, Section 7, Subsection C, Clause 12 stated that homeowners could apply for a natural landscape variance if their property featured native plants or eco-friendly landscaping that promoted biodiversity. The clause was vague, likely added years ago to appease an environmentally conscious board member and forgotten ever since. To Ethan, it was a lifeline. His mind raced with possibilities as he sat at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop illuminating the dark room. He wasn't a botanist, but he knew enough to recognize that this obscure rule could be his ticket to turning Karen's obsession with his lawn into her own undoing. The next morning, Ethan began his research in earnest. He scoured online forums, gardening blogs, and local nursery websites, learning about native plants that thrived in Willow Creek's climate. He discovered that certain species, like clover, wildflowers, and low-maintenance grasses, could qualify as eco-friendly under the HOA's vague definition. The idea took shape. He would transform his lawn into a biodiverse masterpiece, technically compliant with the bylaws, but deliberately designed to infuriate Karen. It wasn't just about avoiding fines. It was about making a point. Ethan, usually reserved and conflict-averse, felt a surge of adrenaline at the thought of outsmarting the HOA and its self-appointed enforcer. He spent the weekend at a local nursery, consulting with a cheerful horticulturist named Sarah who was thrilled to help him craft a rebel garden. Together, they selected a mix of native plants. white clover to replace the patchy grass, purple coneflowers for pops of color, and milkweed to attract butterflies. Sarah explained that these plants were low maintenance, drought-resistant, and perfect for meeting the HOA's variance requirements. Ethan loaded his car with seedlings and bags of soil, his daughter Lily buzzing with excitement about the butterfly garden they were creating. For her, it was a fun project. For Ethan, it was the opening salvo in a war he hadn't asked for but was now ready to fight. By Monday, Ethan had submitted his variance application to the HOA board, complete with a detailed plan and photos of his proposed plants. He cited studies on the environmental benefits of native landscaping, knowing the board couldn't easily dismiss his request without contradicting their own rules. The application process required a 10-day review period, during which Ethan was free to begin planting as long as he followed his submitted plan. He wasted no time. With Lily's help, he spent the next few evenings digging up patches of his lawn, planting seeds, and laying out wildflower beds. The transformation was subtle at first, but the once uniform grass began to take on a wild, vibrant character that stood out starkly against the manicured lawns of Maple Drive. Across the street, Karen Whitaker was apoplectic. From her living room window, she watched Ethan's yard morph into what she deemed a weed-infested jungle. The sight of clover and milkweed sprouting where her beloved uniformity once reigned was an assault on her senses. She stormed to her computer, firing off an email to the HOA board demanding an emergency meeting to block Ethan's variance. She argued that his so-called eco-friendly lawn was a deliberate attempt to undermine the neighborhood's aesthetic standards, attaching photos of the sprouting plants with captions like disgraceful and property value killer. Her emails grew increasingly unhinged, accusing Ethan of everything from laziness to intentional sabotage. The HOA board, caught off guard by Ethan's strategic move, was thrown into disarray. President Marjorie Hensley, a stickler for procedure, acknowledged that Ethan's application was technically valid but privately sympathized with Karen's outrage. Other board members were less certain. Some admired Ethan's creativity, while others worried about setting a precedent that could loosen their iron grip on the neighborhood. The board scheduled a public hearing for the following week, a decision that only amplified the growing tension on Maple Drive. Word of the feud spread like wildfire through Willow Creek's online forum, with neighbors picking sides. Some rallied behind Ethan, tired of Karen's relentless nitpicking, while others, loyal to her vision of suburban perfection, branded him a troublemaker. Karen, unwilling to wait for the hearing, escalated her campaign. She began a door-to-door crusade, clutching her clipboard and a stack of petitions demanding that Ethan's variance be denied. Her pitch was polished, her tone dripping with faux concern for the neighborhood's future. She spoke of declining property values, unruly weeds spreading to other yards, and the slippery slope of allowing one homeowner to flout tradition. Her theatrics worked on some, particularly older residents who revered the HOA's strict standards, but others saw through her facade, whispering about her obsession with control. Karen didn't care about the naysayers. To her, this was a battle for the soul of Willow Creek, and she was determined to win. Ethan, meanwhile, remained focused on his plan. He installed a small sign in his yard, professionally printed, that read, "Native Plant Garden in Progress, supporting local wildlife." The sign was a masterstroke, framing his rebellion as a noble cause. Neighbors began stopping by, some out of curiosity, others to offer support. A retired biologist from down the street praised Ethan's choice of milkweed, noting its role in monarch butterfly conservation. Lily, ever the social butterfly, handed out wildflower seed packets to visitors, charming them with her enthusiasm. The yard was becoming a community talking point, not just for its defiance, but for its unexpected beauty. As the hearing approached, Karen's tactics grew bolder. She began leaving passive-aggressive notes in Ethan's mailbox, reminding him of the fines he'd face if his variance was rejected. She even hired a lawn care company to accidentally mow a strip of Ethan's yard, claiming it was a mistake when he confronted them. Ethan, undeterred, documented every move, saving her notes and photographing the mowed strip as evidence of her overreach. He shared his findings on the neighborhood forum, where support for his cause grew. The once quiet freelancer was becoming an unlikely hero, a symbol of resistance against the HOA's draconian rule. By the end of the week, Ethan's yard was a patchwork of blooming wildflowers and lush clover, a stark contrast to the sterile lawns around it. Butterflies fluttered among the milkweed, and neighbors snapped photos, some even posting them online with hashtags like #WillowCreekRebel. Karen, seething at the sight, doubled down on her petition, vowing to crush Ethan's hippie nonsense at the hearing. But Ethan had another card to play, one he'd been quietly preparing with Sarah's help. As he surveyed his thriving garden, he knew the real showdown was coming, and he was ready to make Karen's worst nightmare a reality. The air in Willow Creek was thick with anticipation as the day of the HOA hearing approached. The community center, a squat brick building usually reserved for potlucks and yoga classes, had been transformed into a battleground for the neighborhood's most contentious feud yet. Ethan Caldwell's native plant garden, now a vibrant mosaic of clover, wildflowers, and milkweed, had become a symbol of rebellion, drawing curious onlookers and polarizing the residents of Maple Drive. Across the street, Karen Whitaker prepared for war, her clipboard now a veritable arsenal of complaints, petitions, and carefully curated evidence. The hearing wasn't just about Ethan's lawn anymore. It was a referendum on the HOA's authority and Karen's reign as its unofficial enforcer. Ethan spent the days leading up to the hearing refining his strategy. His research into the HOA bylaws had uncovered more than just the natural landscape variants. He'd found a clause allowing residents to propose amendments to the rules if they gathered enough signatures. It was a long shot, but Ethan saw an opportunity to challenge the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood. He began quietly canvassing neighbors, sharing his vision of a more flexible, eco-conscious community. Many were hesitant, wary of crossing Karen or the board, but others, particularly younger families and those fed up with the HOA's micromanagement, signed on. Ethan's petition grew steadily, bolstered by the charm of his daughter Lily, who handed out wildflower seeds and chatted about butterflies with anyone who'd listen. Karen, meanwhile, was not idle. She'd enlisted a surprising ally, Roger Hensley, the husband of HOA President Marjorie Hensley. Roger, a retired lawyer with a penchant for bow ties and an encyclopedic memory for legal minutiae, was a formidable addition to Karen's crusade. He'd never been an official board member, citing a desire to stay neutral, but behind closed doors, he was Marjorie's chief advisor, steering the HOA's decisions with a lawyer's precision. Karen had wooed him with promises of preserving Willow Creek's legacy, framing Ethan's garden as the first domino in a collapse of neighborhood standards. Roger, intrigued by the challenge and eager to flex his legal muscles, agreed to help her build an airtight case against Ethan's variants. The hearing itself was a spectacle, drawing a crowd that spilled out of the community center's folding chairs and into the hallway. Neighbors whispered and speculated, their phones buzzing with updates to the Willow Creek forum. Ethan arrived early, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, his application packet neatly organized in a binder. Lily sat beside him, clutching a drawing of a monarch butterfly she'd made to support the garden. The board, seated at a long table, exuded an air of self-important authority, with Marjorie Hensley at the center, her gavel poised like a scepter. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by Roger and a small posse of loyalists, her petition stacked towering on the seat beside her. The proceedings began with Marjorie outlining the agenda, her voice clipped and formal. Ethan was called to present his case first. He stood confidently, detailing the environmental benefits of his native plant garden, reduced water usage, support for pollinators, in compliance with the HOA's own variance clause. He projected photos of his yard, now a colorful haven for butterflies, and shared testimonials from neighbors who'd seen increased wildlife activity. His calm, factual delivery won over some in the crowd, who nodded approvingly as he cited studies on biodiversity. Lily's butterfly drawing, passed around the room, added a touch of heartwarming sincerity that softened even the sternest skeptics. Karen's turn came next, and she approached the podium with the fervor of a televangelist. Her presentation was a masterclass in theatrical outrage, complete with enlarged photos of Ethan's weedy lawn and charts predicting a catastrophic drop in property values. She argued that the variance clause was never meant for sloppy gardens like Ethan's, accusing him of exploiting a loophole to shirk his responsibilities as a homeowner. Roger followed, delivering a dry but devastating critique of Ethan's application, pointing out minor discrepancies in his plant list and questioning whether clover truly qualified as native. The crowd murmured, some swayed by Roger's legal gravitas, others rolling their eyes at Karen's dramatics. The board deliberated briefly before opening the floor to public comments. This was where the real chaos erupted. Neighbors lined up to speak, their opinions split down the middle. A young couple praised Ethan's garden for its environmental impact, while an older resident decried it as an embarrassment to Willow Creek. One woman, emboldened by Ethan's defiance, shared her own story of HOA harassment over a bird feeder, earning sympathetic nods. Karen's supporters countered with tales of declining curb appeal, their voices rising in a chorus of indignation. The room crackled with tension, and Marjorie struggled to maintain order, banging her gavel as arguments spilled into shouting matches. Ethan, watching the chaos unfold, felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. He hadn't expected the hearing to become a neighborhood-wide referendum, but he saw an opportunity. During a brief recess, he slipped out to make a call to Sarah, the horticulturist, who'd been helping him refine his garden. She'd hinted at a secret weapon during their last conversation, a way to elevate his garden from a personal project to a community cause. Sarah promised to deliver it by the next day, something that would make the HOA's case against him crumble. Ethan returned to the hearing with renewed confidence, knowing he had one more card to play. Karen, sensing the tide shifting, doubled down. She and Roger spent the evening drafting a new complaint, this time accusing Ethan of violating a different bylaw, one that required aesthetic harmony in all landscaping. It was a vague rule, open to interpretation, but Roger's legal expertise made it a potential landmine. Karen also began spreading rumors on the forum, claiming Ethan's garden was attracting pests and lowering property values. Her posts, under the Willow Creek Pride handle, were vicious but effective, rallying her base and sowing doubt among fence-sitters. As the hearing adjourned, the board announced they'd delay their decision until a follow-up meeting in a week, citing the need to review Ethan's application further. The crowd dispersed, buzzing with gossip and speculation. Ethan walked home with Lily, her small hand in his, feeling the weight of the battle but buoyed by the support he'd gained. His garden was no longer just his. It was a symbol of resistance, a rallying cry for those tired of the HOA's tyranny. Karen, meanwhile, retreated to her pristine home, plotting her next move with Roger. She wasn't about to let a slacker like Ethan ruin her vision of Willow Creek. But as Ethan's garden bloomed brighter each day, drawing butterflies and curious neighbors alike, Karen's grip on the neighborhood began to slip, and something bigger was brewing. The week following the HOA hearing was a pressure cooker in Willow Creek, with Ethan Caldwell's native plant garden at the center of a neighborhood storm. The once quiet suburb buzzed with whispers, sidelong glances, and heated debates on the online forum, where posts about the lawn rebel and Karen's crusade racked up hundreds of comments. Ethan's yard, now a thriving patchwork of clover, coneflowers, and milkweed, drew daily visitors, some to admire the butterflies flitting among the blooms, others to scowl in solidarity with Karen Whitaker's campaign for conformity. Ethan, undeterred by the scrutiny, was counting on Sarah's promised secret weapon to tip the scales in his favor at the upcoming follow-up hearing. But Karen, with Roger Hensley's legal acumen in her corner, was plotting a move that could bury Ethan's rebellion before it fully bloomed. Ethan's days were a whirlwind of preparation. He spent hours tending his garden, ensuring every plant met the HOA's variance requirements. Lily, his daughter, became his enthusiastic assistant, watering the milkweed and keeping a log of butterfly sightings for a school project she dubbed Operation Monarch. The garden's transformation was undeniable. Where once stood a patchy lawn now thrived a vibrant ecosystem, with bees humming and wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, some bringing homemade cookies or sharing their own HOA grievances. Ethan's petition to amend the bylaws was gaining traction, with signatures piling up from residents fed up with the board's overreach. The momentum was on his side, but he knew the real game-changer was coming. Sarah, the horticulturist, arrived midweek with the secret weapon, a letter from the state's Department of Environmental Conservation. She'd connected Ethan with a contact at the agency, who certified his garden as a pollinator habitat, eligible for a small grant and official recognition. The certification was a golden ticket. It not only validated Ethan's variance under the HOA bylaws, but also positioned his garden as a model for sustainable landscaping, potentially embarrassing the board if they rejected it. Sarah also brought a stack of brochures about native plant benefits, which Ethan planned to distribute at the hearing. The certification, combined with his growing community support, gave Ethan a surge of confidence. He could almost see Karen's smug expression faltering. Across the street, Karen was unraveling. The sight of Ethan's garden flourishing, now adorned with a new sign proclaiming Certified Pollinator Habitat, was a personal affront. Her pristine lawn, once the neighborhood's gold standard, now seemed sterile next to Ethan's riot of color. Her online rants grew more frantic, accusing Ethan of eco-fraud and claiming his garden was a health hazard, attracting vermin like bees. Her followers on the forum echoed her outrage, but cracks were forming in her coalition. Some neighbors, swayed by the butterflies and Ethan's quiet charisma, began questioning her motives. Karen, sensing the shift, turned to Roger for a bolder strategy, one that would hit Ethan where it hurt. Roger, ever the tactician, uncovered a rarely enforced bylaw requiring homeowners to maintain safe and accessible front yards. He proposed that Ethan's garden, with its dense plantings, could be deemed a tripping hazard or an obstruction for emergency services. It was a stretch, but Roger's legal finesse made it plausible. Karen seized the idea, hiring a private inspector to survey Ethan's yard under the guise of a routine safety check. The inspector, a friend of Roger's from his law firm days, produced a report citing overgrown vegetation and potential risks to pedestrians. Karen submitted the report to the HOA board, demanding Ethan's variance be revoked and his garden razed. She also spread copies of the report around the neighborhood, slipping them into mailboxes with a note warning of dangerous conditions at 17 Maple Drive. Ethan caught wind of the inspector's visit when a neighbor tipped him off. Furious but composed, he checked his garden and found no evidence of the alleged hazards. The plants were neatly arranged, with clear pathways to the front door. He suspected sabotage and began reviewing footage from a small security camera he'd installed after Karen's earlier lawn mowing stunt. Sure enough, the footage showed the inspector lingering suspiciously, taking photos from odd angles to exaggerate the garden's density. Ethan saved the evidence, adding it to his growing file on Karen's tactics. He also contacted Sarah, who suggested he invite a local environmental group to tour his garden before the hearing, turning the safety narrative into another point in his favor. The environmental group, Green Haven Alliance, was thrilled to visit. Their leader, a botanist named Clara, praised Ethan's garden as a textbook example of urban conservation. She offered to speak at the hearing, bringing data on how pollinator habitats boosted local ecosystems and even property values, a direct counter to Karen's claims. Clara's team also helped Ethan install a small informational kiosk near his garden, complete with QR codes linking to studies on native plants. The kiosk, modest but professional, became a neighborhood talking point, drawing more visitors and further eroding Karen's narrative. Lily, beaming with pride, added a hand-painted sign to the kiosk, "Save the butterflies." Karen, blindsided by the environmental group's involvement, doubled down on her smear campaign. She posted anonymously on the forum, claiming Ethan was bribing outsiders to prop up his weed patch. She also organized a neighborhood beautification event, ostensibly to clean up Maple Drive, but really a ploy to rally her supporters and intimidate Ethan. On the day of the event, a dozen of Karen's loyalists gathered outside her house, armed with rakes and trash bags, casting pointed glares at Ethan's yard. Karen led the charge, loudly discussing community standards while sweeping non-existent debris from the sidewalk. The display was meant to shame Ethan, but it backfired when passers-by stopped to admire his garden instead, some even joining Lily to learn about monarch butterflies. As the follow-up hearing loomed, Ethan felt the weight of the fight, but also a growing sense of purpose. His garden was no longer just a personal stand. It was a movement. Neighbors who'd once avoided him now waved warmly, and his petition was nearing the signatures needed to force a vote on bylaw changes. Karen, meanwhile, was growing desperate. Roger warned her that the environmental certification could sway the board, so she began drafting a new petition, this one calling for a complete overhaul of the variance clause to prevent future abuses. She also hinted to her allies about a surprise she had planned for the hearing, something that would expose Ethan as the fraud she believed him to be. Ethan, unaware of Karen's latest scheme, focused on his final preparations. He printed copies of the state certification, gathered Clara's data, and rehearsed his speech with Sarah's input. Lily, ever his cheerleader, made a poster for the hearing that read, "Bees love us, why don't you?" As he surveyed his garden, now a thriving testament to his defiance, Ethan knew the battle was far from over. Karen's desperation was palpable, and her surprise could change everything. But with the neighborhood watching and his secret weapon in hand, Ethan was ready to face whatever came next. The second HOA hearing in Willow Creek's community center was a powder keg waiting to ignite. The room was packed beyond capacity, with residents lining the walls and spilling into the parking lot, their phones recording every moment for the neighborhood's online forum. Ethan Caldwell's native plant garden had become a lightning rod, splitting the community into factions, those who saw it as a bold stand against HOA tyranny and those who, led by Karen Whitaker, viewed it as a blight on Willow Creek's manicured perfection. The air buzzed with tension as Ethan prepared to unveil his state-certified pollinator habitat, while Karen, flanked by her ally Roger Hensley, ready to surprise she believed would dismantle Ethan's rebellion once and for all. But Ethan had a counter-move brewing, one that would turn the hearing into a spectacle no one in Willow Creek would forget. Ethan arrived early, his binder now bulging with documents. The state's certification letter, Clara's environmental data, and screenshots of Karen's increasingly unhinged forum posts. Lily sat beside him, clutching her "Bees Love Us" poster, her eyes wide with excitement despite the gravity of the moment. The garden outside their home had reached its peak, a vibrant tapestry of wildflowers and clover that drew daily crowds of butterflies and curious neighbors. Ethan's petition to amend the HOA bylaws had garnered enough signatures to force a vote, a fact he planned to leverage to shift the narrative from his lawn to the board's overreach. With Clara from Greenhaven Alliance set to speak, Ethan felt cautiously optimistic. though Karen's smug demeanor across the room hinted at trouble. Karen, dressed in a crisp blazer and clutching a sleek folder, exuded confidence. Her surprise was a bombshell she'd spent days orchestrating with Roger's help. She'd hired a private investigator to dig into Ethan's background, hoping to uncover dirt that would discredit him. The investigator, a shady acquaintance of Roger's, had found something juicy: a decade-old misdemeanor charge from Ethan's college days for trespassing during a protest. It was minor, long expunged, and irrelevant to the lawn dispute, but Karen saw it as a way to paint Ethan as a lifelong troublemaker. She'd prepared a dramatic presentation, complete with printed court records and a PowerPoint slide titled, "Who is Ethan Caldwell Really?" Her plan was to unveil it mid-hearing, framing Ethan's garden as part of a pattern of defiance against authority. The hearing began with Marjorie Hensley's gavel, her voice strained as she called for order. Ethan presented first, his delivery polished and calm. He outlined the state certification, emphasizing how his garden met every requirement of the HOA's variance clause. Clara followed, her expertise lending weight to his case. She shared data on how pollinator habitats boosted local ecosystems, citing studies that linked them to higher property values, a direct jab at Karen's arguments. The crowd murmured approvingly, some snapping photos of Clara's charts. Lily's poster, held high, drew smiles from the back rows. Ethan capped his presentation by submitting his petition for a bylaw amendment, calling for relaxed landscaping rules to encourage sustainability. The move caught the board off guard, their faces tightening as they realized the vote could challenge their authority. Karen's turn came, and she strode to the podium like a prosecutor in a courtroom drama. She began with her usual spiel about property values and aesthetic harmony, her voice rising as she brandished the inspector's report on Ethan's hazardous garden. Then, with a theatrical flourish, she unveiled her surprise, projecting the court records onto a screen. Gasps rippled through the room as she declared Ethan a career agitator, accusing him of using his garden to stir chaos in Willow Creek. She pointed to the trespassing charge, spinning a narrative of Ethan as a reckless outsider who'd never respect the neighborhood's values. Roger followed, arguing that the board had a duty to reject the variance to protect the community from unstable elements. The crowd was divided, some nodding in agreement, others whispering in disbelief at Karen's low blow. Ethan, blindsided but composed, felt a surge of anger. The charge was ancient history, a youthful indiscretion during a campus environmental rally, long resolved and irrelevant. He saw Karen's tactic for what it was, a desperate attempt to smear him when her arguments were failing. He whispered to Clara, who nodded and slipped out to make a call. Ethan took the podium for his rebuttal, calmly addressing the misdemeanor. He explained its context, a peaceful protest to save a local wetland, tying it to his current fight for sustainability. The crowd softened, some clapping as he reframed Karen's attack as proof of his lifelong commitment to the environment. He then pivoted, revealing his security footage of the inspector's suspicious behavior, suggesting Karen had orchestrated a biased report. Murmurs grew louder, with several neighbors glaring at Karen. The real counterstrike came when Clara returned, accompanied by a surprise guest, a representative from the state's Department of Environmental Conservation. The official, a stern woman named Dr. Patel, had been briefed by Clara and was outraged by Karen's attempt to undermine a certified habitat. Dr. Patel addressed the board, confirming the garden's compliance with state guidelines and warning that rejecting the variance could invite scrutiny from environmental regulators. She also announced that Ethan's garden had been selected for a statewide conservation award, a bombshell that sent the room into an uproar. Cheers erupted from Ethan's supporters, while Karen's face drained of color. The award not only validated Ethan's efforts, but also positioned Willow Creek as a potential model for eco-friendly neighborhoods, a PR nightmare for the HOA if they opposed it. The board, visibly rattled, called a recess to deliberate. Karen huddled with Roger, her confidence shaken. She hadn't anticipated the state's involvement or the award, which turned her smear campaign into a liability. She scrambled to rally her supporters, whispering about filing a formal complaint with the state to challenge the certification's legitimacy. But her allies were wavering, unnerved by the official's presence and the growing crowd outside, now chanting, "Save the garden." Ethan, meanwhile, felt a cautious thrill. The award was a game changer, but he knew Karen wouldn't surrender easily. He spent the recess strategizing with Clara and Dr. Patel, preparing for the board's decision and whatever Karen might throw next. As the hearing resumed, the tension was palpable. Marjorie announced that the board would issue a final ruling by the next day, citing the need to review the state's input. The crowd groaned, frustrated by the delay, but Ethan saw it as a victory. Time was on his side, with the neighborhood rallying behind him. Karen stormed out, her folder clutched tightly, already plotting her next move. She wasn't done yet, and her desperation was pushing her toward a reckless gambit that could either crush Ethan or backfire spectacularly. Ethan, watching her go, knew the final battle was coming, and his garden, now a symbol of defiance and hope, was ready to bloom brighter than ever. The final day of the Willow Creek HOA saga dawned with a surreal calm, the kind that precedes a storm. Ethan Caldwell's native plant garden, now a certified pollinator habitat and a neighborhood landmark, stood as a testament to his defiance, its wildflowers swaying under a gentle breeze while butterflies danced in the morning light. The community was on edge, awaiting the HOA board's ruling on Ethan's variance and his petition to amend the bylaws. The online forum buzzed with speculation, hashtags like #WillowCreekRebel trending locally, as neighbors posted photos of Ethan's garden and debated the HOA's next move. Karen Whitaker, however, was not about to let Ethan's triumph stand. Her desperation had morphed into a reckless plan, one that would either cement her control or unravel everything she'd fought for. The stage was set for a showdown that would reshape Willow Creek forever. Ethan spent the morning preparing for the board's announcement, scheduled for that evening at the community center. His binder was now a war chest, packed with the state certification, Clara's environmental data, Dr. Patel's testimony, and over 100 signatures on his bylaw amendment petition, enough to force a community vote. Lily, ever his anchor, helped by updating the garden's informational kiosk with a new sign, award-winning pollinator habitat. The State Conservation Award, announced at the last hearing, had turned Ethan's yard into a local sensation, drawing visitors from beyond Willow Creek. A news van from a nearby station even parked outside, filming a segment on suburban eco-rebels. Ethan, though exhausted, felt a quiet pride. His fight had grown bigger than his lawn. It was about freedom, community, and standing up to petty tyranny. Karen, meanwhile, was spiraling. The state's involvement and the award had shattered her narrative of Ethan as a troublemaker. Her forum posts, once commanding, were now met with skepticism, and even her loyalists were wavering, unnerved by the public backlash. Roger Hensley, her legal ally, warned her that the board was leaning toward approving Ethan's variance to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Karen refused to accept defeat. She'd spent the night hatching a final scheme, a direct attack on Ethan's garden. She contacted a landscaping company, one known for its aggressive tactics, and arranged for them to accidentally mow Ethan's yard under the pretense of a mix-up. The plan was simple: destroy the garden before the ruling, forcing Ethan to start over and proving her point about its unsustainability. She paid extra to ensure the job was done at dawn, before Ethan could intervene. As the sun rose, Ethan was jolted awake by the roar of lawnmowers. He rushed outside to find two workers tearing through his garden, their blades shredding clover and milkweed alike. Lily followed, tears welling as she saw her butterfly haven reduced to mulch. Ethan shouted for them to stop, waving his certification letter, but the workers, claiming they had a work order, continued until he physically blocked their path. Neighbors gathered, some filming, others yelling at the workers to leave. The news van, still parked nearby, captured the chaos, broadcasting it live on social media. Ethan's security camera, ever vigilant, recorded the entire incident, including a glimpse of Karen watching from her porch, her arms crossed and a faint smile on her lips. Furious but strategic, Ethan called Clara and Dr. Patel, who arrived within the hour. Clara assessed the damage. About a third of the garden was ruined, but the core plantings remained intact. Dr. Patel was livid, declaring the destruction a potential violation of state environmental guidelines. She contacted her agency, which promised to investigate and hold the landscaping company accountable. Ethan, channeling his anger, rallied neighbors to help repair the garden. By midday, a dozen residents were replanting seedlings, donated by Sarah's nursery, while Lily handed out Save the Garden stickers. The news crew interviewed Ethan, who spoke passionately about his fight for sustainability and community. The story went viral, with hashtag Willow Creek Rebel trending regionally, painting Karen as the villain in a David and Goliath tale. Karen, watching the neighborhood rally around Ethan, realized her plan had backfired. The landscaping company, under pressure from the state, admitted to receiving her order and produced an email trail linking her to the sabotage. The evidence was damning, and Ethan shared it on the forum, along with the security footage. The backlash was swift. Neighbors who'd once supported Karen turned on her, flooding the forum with calls for accountability. Even Roger distanced himself, unwilling to be associated with her reckless move. Karen, cornered, posted a defensive rant, claiming she was protecting the neighborhood, but it only fueled the outrage. By the time the evening hearing arrived, her credibility was in tatters. The community center was a circus with reporters, environmental activists, and nearly every Willow Creek resident in attendance. Marjorie Hensley, visibly shaken by the day's events, opened the meeting with a strained announcement. The board had unanimously approved Ethan's variance, citing its compliance with state guidelines and community support. Cheers erupted, drowning out the grumbles of Karen's remaining allies. Marjorie then addressed Ethan's petition, confirming it had enough signatures for a community vote on bylaw changes, to be held in 2 weeks. The crowd roared again, sensing a shift in power. Ethan, standing with Lily and Clara, felt a weight lift. His garden, though scarred, had won. Karen, seated in the back, was silent, her face a mask of defeat. The board, aware of her sabotage, announced an investigation into her actions, hinting at potential fines or removal from her unofficial role as HOA enforcer. The news crew cornered her outside, but she fled to her car, refusing to comment. The forum exploded with memes of her failed crusade, and neighbors began planning a pollinator festival in Ethan's yard to celebrate the victory. The garden was quickly restored, with donations pouring in from across the region. Ethan's award from the state was presented the following week, drawing a crowd that spilled onto Maple Drive, now a symbol of change. Willow Creek was transformed. The bylaw vote, held 2 weeks later, passed overwhelmingly, loosening landscaping rules and prioritizing sustainability. Marjorie resigned, and a new board, including Clara, took over, promising transparency. Karen, humiliated, put her house up for sale, unable to face the neighbors she'd alienated. Ethan's garden thrived, a living monument to his fight, with Lily's butterflies fluttering as a daily reminder of what they'd achieved. The neighborhood, once suffocated by rules, bloomed with new gardens, each a quiet rebellion against the old order. Ethan, now a local hero, stood on his porch, watching Lily chase butterflies, knowing he'd not only saved his lawn but changed Willow Creek forever.